I've mentioned that sometimes when I speak about a koan, I choose it because there's something that feels a little bit obvious to me about it. Some resonance where I think, oh, I have something to say. And occasionally I'll grab one because of the opposite, because I pick it up and I feel a little flummoxed at first. So today I want to bring one of those, one that for me requires a different kind of chewing. This is case 47 from Dogen's collection. Like most of them, it's pretty short. One day, after sitting, Guishan pointed at the straw sandals and said to Yangshan, "All hours of the day we receive people's support. Don't betray them." Yangshan said, "Long ago in Sudatta's garden, the Buddha expounded just this." Guishan said, "That's not enough. Say more." Yangshan said, "When it is cold, to wear socks for others is not prohibited." This is different from a lot of koans, even on a base level, because so often we have a monk approaching a teacher. And so there's a kind of a challenge or a question or a confusion that comes from the person of lower rank. And the teacher is reacting to that somehow. And usually, occasionally gets kind of schooled, but most often kind of pulls the rug out. But in this case, they've just finished Zazen, and Guishan is the teacher. And he initiates this conversation that we come to understand is a little bit playful. They finish Zazen and they see the sandals, the straw sandals. Now, this is taking place around 800 AD in China. And my reference point is Japan. But I imagine it's something similar, that in Japan we wore something called waraji. Waraji were these hand braided straw sandals. We would wear them when we did alms rounds. You would wear them when you went from temple to temple. They're relatively easy to make, but they're kind of a symbol of austerity in the practice because they're very cheap and they cut into your feet. So Guishan points to the straw sandals that are lined up, and he says, "All hours of the day, we receive people's support. Don't betray them. In every moment of every day, we are being supported by others. Don't let them down." And then Yangshan, the student, says, "Long ago in Sudatta's garden, the Buddha expounded just this." Now, Sudatta's garden is Jetavara, which was Sudatta was one of the Buddha's disciples, and he owned this land that became one of the Buddha's main headquarters, or the main headquarters during the Buddha's lifetime. So he's just saying, while he was there and he was teaching the Dharma, the Buddha said just this. So essentially, the first part of this conversation is the teacher says, we shouldn't let down the people who support us. And the student says, yep, Buddha said the same. And then Guishan says, yeah, that's not enough. Say more than that, right? This is the moment when we realize that Guishan is inviting a certain kind of conversation. They're not just chatting. He's testing, or he's pushing, he's probing. He's giving Yangshan an opportunity. And then Yangshan says, when it is cold, to wear socks for others is not prohibited. So he takes it in a really unexpected direction. And in doing so, he opens up a big can of worms in the practice. Now, just so that we're picturing everything correctly, socks, in this context, again, because I think it's basically the same in that period in China and then later in Japan. Nobody has knit socks yet. So socks are these little booties that are just of cloth, and then you kind of clip them in the back to keep them on. In Japan, they're tabi if they have a little toe, or if they don't have the toe, they're bessu. And there are occasions where you would wear the straw sandals with the sock inside, and there are others where you wouldn't. And in the winter, especially when it's so cold, if you don't wear that inside, it will hurt so badly, not just because it's so cold, and not just because it's waraji, but because of the combination of the two. It's really, really painful. So, to recap, the teacher says, we're always being supported by people. We can't betray them. And Yangshan says, yep, that teaching exists. And Guishan says, go deeper than that. And Yangshan says, when it's cold, if we do it for others, it's okay to wear socks. So we're tying two things. We're tying this act of not betraying the people who support us to wearing socks. And the reason it stops my mind the first time I read it, the reason it feels like there's a needle to thread, is because putting on socks when it's cold, transparently, is something we do for our own sake. Right? We do it for our own comfort. We do it for our own health. It's cold out, so I put on socks. And Yangshan says, it's okay to do that for others. And in this way, we don't betray them. These two people, in this brief conversation, paint a portrait of the relationship between beings. All of them at once. It's so elegant. It's so poetic. Starting with this just bald assertion that in every moment of every day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we are being upheld by others. And the next step in that is that if understanding that we're being held by others, that we're being supported by others, that we have a responsibility to them. And in that responsibility, we must not betray that support. We owe them something. We have a duty. And then Yangshan portrays that duty as putting on socks when it's cold. I've mentioned before, because I suspect I'm not the only one, that when I first came to this practice, I wasn't thinking about all beings at all. When I first came to this practice, I thought it was so cool. It had a very kind of Jedi flavor to it. And I loved the idea of meditation, and I loved the idea of going deep into something and penetrating something with my mind. Right? But I stuck around. I stuck around through all the disappointment of that kind of practice, which doesn't go very far, until I could start hearing these other teachings, the more fundamental teachings about this relationship that we have with others, this idea of what it is to be a being in a world of beings. And I started saying things like, beings are countless. I vow to free them all. Just saying it. And in saying that, I started trying to figure out how to do it. And the only way that I could understand to do it was as an act of will. And so when I would sit, when I would meditate, I would think to myself, because this seems to be the center of the practice, whatever this is, whatever this practice is, this is saving all beings. And I actually did a little montage in my head. I would picture the corners of the earth. I would see someone in Asia and someone in Africa and someone in Europe. I played this whole game. It was always changing, but it was always at its core the same idea. I was trying to picture all beings so that I could save all beings, in the same way that someone might try to picture an infinite universe. Because once you hear about it, how can you not? How can you not at least try to draw that in your head? This koan comes from a place far beyond that stage of practice. That place where we're trying to piece it together, that place where we're trying to kind of contract and somehow send an energy out into the world that everyone can feel and everyone can benefit from. Whatever that is. What Yangshan says is the logical extension of what all these teachings say, which is that I is a delusion. There is no me and other beings. Guishan establishes this from the very beginning. We're being supported all the time. Nothing that I'm doing here is separate from what someone else is doing out there. And so Guishan first portrays that as a receptive act, which maybe is the next step after whatever it is that I was doing, where I was trying to put something out. We put something out and put something out and put something out. And if we think about it hard enough, we start to think, oh, maybe I'm getting something back. Maybe all these beings that I keep imagining are sending me something. That's interesting. Always this idea of this interplay of energy, right? Because how else do we picture it? Yangshan says, it's okay to wear socks when it's cold, when we do it for others. Doing the most ordinary thing, the most mundane thing, the thing we don't really have to question. We can replace this with so many things. It's okay to brush your teeth in the morning for others. Right? It's okay to make breakfast in the morning and eat it for others. Not because, and this is where I enjoyed thinking about this today, because where I first went when I read this was, if I put on the socks when it's cold, that enables me, that takes care of me somehow, right? Keeps me safe, it keeps me warm. And then that makes me better able to fulfill these vows of freeing all beings and ending all delusion, etc., etc. Right? And we have this. We have this when we eat. When we do really formal meals with the oryoki, we chant these 5 verses. And in them we say that we take this food as medicine to sustain our life so that it will be a support for us in the practice. And the practice being the practice of vow. Right? Saying, yeah, it's fine to eat, but don't eat because it's a luxury. Don't eat because you really like the taste necessarily. Eat because food is fuel. And fuel goes into this work, and the work is the work of vow. So that's how I first read this. I don't think that's wrong. It's actually a useful way for me to think about it. But I think that Yangshan is saying something more. He's talking about an acknowledgement, a simple acknowledgement. If we are in fact always being supported by other beings, then everything that we do is affecting other beings. Always. There is nothing that we do in a vacuum. There is nothing we do in isolation. There is nothing we do in secret. So that little piece of chocolate that you take down from the top shelf when nobody's looking because it's a little treat for yourself, it's not just for yourself. Not because it's feeding all beings with chocolate, but because it can't be for yourself. Because there's nothing that you do that's just yours. And when you start to notice that there's nothing you do that's just yours, there can be a shift toward understanding that whatever you do is done for others. I think this is a part of the practice. This is one of those lines where some people might feel, I don't want this. This feels heavy. This feels like a burden. Or it feels like a mind game. I understand that. There are a few of these along the way. But this really comes out of something very, very fundamental. We don't have to have some well-drawn view of the cosmos. We don't have to have an idea of all the beings and the ways in which they relate. This is simply an expression of non-self, of interdependence, that we are being acted upon and we are acting upon. We can take the all beings out of it if we want and just recognize that everything we do has some impact beyond ourselves. The things that you say, the things that you think, the way that you stand, the shows that you watch on television, the way that you spend your time when it seems like there's nothing to do, the banana that you ate yesterday for lunch. All of these things have an impact on someone else. We can think about that in terms of supply chain. We can think about it as economics. We can think about it as how that banana affected your mood, which affected how you spoke to the next person, which affected their day. And I think there's utility in playing that game a little bit as a reminder that whatever the situation, whatever or however mundane, however small it is, we can always find the way to someone else. Not only find the way to someone else, but recognize that though there is impact, we don't get to know what that impact is, not fully. We don't get to control what that impact is, not fully. And so we are left with recognition, we are left with intention, we are left with this moment of doing something and understanding that we are not doing it alone. We are receiving and we are giving. And what Guishan and Yangshan are doing is they're naming it. Because it's true whether we talk about it or not. It's true whether we notice it or not. It's true whether we understand it or not. There is giving and there is receiving. And there is giving and there is receiving. And there is giving and there is receiving. And it never, ever, ever, ever stops. And so if you want to know what this practice looks like moment to moment, if we want to talk about what this practice looks like off the cushion, this is part of it. It's taking that inevitable act of giving and making it a choice. Not because that makes it better, but because then we're just more in alignment with what's real. So we pull on our socks when it's cold. And we understand that we're doing that in relationship. We drink a cup of tea alone in the kitchen, and we understand that we are doing that in relationship. This is only heavy until it sinks in. And then it doesn't weigh anything at all, because there was nothing else different before, and there's nothing else different after. It's just this. It's the feeling of this moment minus whatever energy it requires for us to imagine that there's me and there's you. That's where I'll stop.